We have a black orc in Grimgore, an orc in Azhag, a goblin in Grom, a night goblin in Skarsnik, a savage orc in Wurzag. All we are missing of the 6 main Greenskin sub-races is forest goblins. And of the forest goblins, there is only one I imagine would be our legendary lord, and that is Snagla GROBSPIT. Snagla is leader of the Red Venom tribe that lived in the Gnarlwood on the edge of the Drakwold. They were mostly destroyed except Snagla and his Deff Creepers, an existing Total War regiment of renown. They would unite with the Black Pit tribe and become a terror to the forests of the Old World. His faction, interestingly, may focus on protecting forests in the Black Pit, similar to Wood Elves, though they would not get along. Instead of fighting in the Underway, they would fight in woodland paths like the aforementioned and Beastmen. Additionally, his default stance may be Stalk, giving a chance to ambush when attacking, or he might also get the Masterful Ambush stance. For campaign buffs, he could increase ambush success chance and reduce all Spider and Forest Goblins units' upkeep. He may also have specific bonuses for fighting against humans, or the Empire specifically. Now, that intro and the current slide shown on screen are the quick spark notes. I believe a Forest Goblins faction is the top priority as far as what's missing for the Greenskins. A large portion of the missing units are from the Forest Goblins. First, we will read a bit of lore to set the stage, but I will leave timestamps if you would like to skip any particular part. After the lore, I will break down Snagla and my interpretation of how Forest Goblins should work. Now, without further ado, when men from the Empire first cut their frontiers deeper into the surrounding forest, they unwittingly began the bitter war of the Drakwold that continues to this day. The fractious Forest Goblin tribes who dwelt in the hinter regions of that sprawling woodland ceased their internal strife to unite against the enemy. Unbeknownst to the men of the Empire, their deepest forays had encroached dangerously close to the most holy of sites to the Forest Goblin tribes, the sacred lands known as the Black Pit, or the Valley of Many Eyes. To stray near that dark and web-strewn place is certain death, for the Forest Goblins will stop at nothing to destroy any interlopers who dare approach it. At first, forest patrols and huntsmen disappeared at an alarming rate. The deep woods were always treacherous, but the men of the Empire were savvy enough about life beneath the boughs to understand that something terrible was brewing. They didn't have to wait long, for soon the Forest Goblin raiding parties mobbed together to form armies. Emboldened by their numbers, the Forest Goblins left the confines of the woods to mount fierce attacks on the nearest human settlements. In turn, fresh troops marched out from the Empire's cities, eager to push the boundaries of civilization further. Many ambushes and large battles followed, most fought entirely beneath the gloomy canopy. One of the rising legends amongst the Forest Goblins was Snagla GROBSPIT. He and his mob of spider riders, the Deff Creepers, were at the forefront of every Greenskin victory. It was Snagla who rode straight into the line of handgunners and broke the Empire's flank, leading to what is now known as the Forest Road Massacre. It was the stealthy Deff Creepers who silenced the central watchtower, leading to the fall of the walled town of Glomstadt. His foes whisper that Snagla and spider riders can creep right out of the very shadows, and perhaps it is true. Snagla GROBSPIT is a woodcrafty spider rider, able to sneak around enemy armies and launch attacks from unexpected quarters. While all Forest Goblins hail a high-pitched cry as they charge, none can match the horrible undulating cry of Snagla and his mob. Snagla has a knack for picking his way through dense cover and scuttling unseen over the forest canopy. Once the Deff Creepers have worked their way into the most advantageous position, they will dart out of hiding to ruthlessly destroy their target. Of Snagla's tribe, the Red Venom Forest Goblins, little is known. They were destroyed early on in the battles in the Drakwold, for they dwelt on the edge of the Gnarlwood, the lands that were first cleared by the Empire's soldiery. If there were any survivors, they never returned from out of the woods. When Snagla returned to find his camp in ruins, it is rumored that the Spider God spoke to him. All that is known for sure is that Snagla took the fangs from his tribe's cannonball-blasted Arachnarok spider. With these he fashioned a throwing spear and a great spiked club. When the forest goblins first began to gather, seeking to push the invading humans further away from the sacred black pit, Snagla and his Deff Creepers mob turned up, eager to join the fight. They alone still wear the distinctive striped feathers and face paint associated with the Red Venom tribe. Snagla and his mob have a penchant for the feathers worn by many Empire troops. After battle, the Deff Creepers soak these feathers in the blood of the former owners and wear them as grim trophies upon their weapons and shields. With their status still growing, Snagla and his mob travel throughout the vast forest, ever eager to join any battle they can. The most revered of all forest goblin sites is the Black Pit, which is also called the Valley of Many Eyes. Beyond a series of wooded hills, deep in the trackless depths of the Drakewald forest, can be found this bleak and unwholesome valley. Here the light of the sun never penetrates, and all color seems drained from the lands. The ground is strewn with piled bones, and pit marked with the nest layers of spiders of enormous size. It truly is the black heart of spiderdom in the world. Only the largest of Ragnarok spiders make their foul dance here, gargantuan creatures whose bloated size staggers belief. When the cycles of the moons are in alignment, Ragnarok spiders make their way to this twisted wood to breed, traveling from the forests of the old world and beyond. The forest goblins protect this land, entering it themselves only occasionally in order to drop vast amounts of sacrifices into the dark pits. They let the ancient behemoths sleep, and they wake only to feed languidly upon the mountains of sacrificial victims. Such great beasts are only fully aroused in times of greatest need. On the battlefield, he would focus on poison, stealth, and skirmishing. He should innately ride a generic giant spider, but then unlocks a named, unique, gigantic spider. There are 4 main species of Warhammer spider, and only 3 are represented in Total War: hatchling, giant, and a Ragnarok, a swarm of war beasts, and a single entity monster respectively. Gigantic spiders would give us the monstrous cavalry mounts and units. The only named gigantic spider I could find is Grib, an infamous grave biter rode by an individual named the Masked Chieftain. This is not Snagla, apparently, but I mean, they bear a striking resemblance, so give Snagla Grib, in my opinion. A monstrous mount is the first way to make sure Snagla isn't an underwhelming tic-tac-toe type character. An innate missile weapon is the other. In tabletop, he had the Sting of Snagla, a one-use only throwing spear. That would be hella lame if they kept it like that. Sure, give him 2 to 5 uses of a bound sniping ability, but only on top of an innate missile. Maybe it only has a dozen or so ammunition, but give it to him. The standard missile would deal armor piercing, poison, and possibly anti-large damage at roughly 400 total strength. Maybe the bound ability missile also immobilizes an enemy temporarily if it hits. On his standard giant spider, he would most likely struggle in the melee, but after getting a unique gigantic spider, he should stand tall. He wouldn't be taking on Grimgore anytime soon, but most others would be right to fear. His other weapon, Fang Spike, would additionally aid here, perhaps giving magic, AP, and enhanced poison. Perhaps also it gives him bound spider summons from the new Lore of Spiders. We have seen the Lore of Spiders interpreted by Total War modders before. In Warhammer 3, I believe it is the Wez Speshul Mod I will be showing on screen currently. In editing, I will find it and link the mod in the description. Now my ideas for the lore roughly match. For the Lore of Spiders, I think a passive doubling poison effects makes good sense. A spider-themed Net of Ammontok spell makes loads of sense and should be the cheap default spell of the lore. Perhaps besides Shaman Lords and Heroes, Boss Lords and Heroes like Snagla could receive the spell as a bound ability. A hex that poisons all enemies in the spell radius makes sense, upgrading the spell for increased radius. Spider summons with each point upgrading to the next biggest species from hatchling to the new gigantic spider is a no-brainer. Perhaps great shamans can unlock a skill to summon an Arachnarok as well. A spell granting snipe, unspottable, increased speed, and perhaps stalk. I think most, if not all, Forest Goblin and Spider units should get stalk either innately or through a Lord's skill or technology, though. A poison, wind, breath, or missile spell, and direct damage are also no-brainers. Another way his campaign could benefit from Spider Worship is a mechanic similar to Tehennawan's Sacrifices to Sotek. You would have a unique post-battle option to gain sacrifices, and the buffs would go towards Forest Goblins and Spider units primarily. Instead of getting Regiments of Renown or Blessed Spawnings, you could get Wa units such as Lava Spiders. Or perhaps Lava Spiders doesn't make sense in a forest, and we could get something like a new Ice Spider variant. Just an idea though. Or it could give additional chance to gain recruitment slots for a beasts mechanic similar to Drycha. These wild beasts could range from spider hatchlings, giant spiders, giant wolves, feral boars, feral squigs, feral wyverns, and cave bats. Snagla may also benefit from event battles like the Wood Elves Forest and Empire Forts. Only here you might be attacked by men, beastmen, or Wood Elves. The existing Regiment of Renown, Deff Creepers, would most likely unlock after the first turn mission, similar to how Archaon, Kolak, and Sigvald get their Regiments of Renown. Now the pull of Skarsnik's growing Wa had lured the most infamous of goblin raiders to battle. All the way from the forests of the Old World, GROBSPIT and his Deff Creepers came to join forces with the Night Goblins, a master ambusher himself. Snagla and his wall-crawling spider rider mobs had proven themselves in dozens of wicked exploits around the Eight Peaks. They had only recently ended their running battle with the Dwarf Rangers that roamed the mountain. Severed dwarf heads adorned the spears and totems of this fierce mob as they lined up under the banner of the Bloodfeathers warband. Snagla always rides into battle at the head of his elite Deff Creepers. The Deff Creepers are a unit of Forest Goblin Spider Riders with the Ambushers, devastating charge, and hatred for the Empire's special rules. In addition, they cause fear in any turn that they successfully charge into combat. Snagla must set up with this unit and may not leave it. No other character may join the unit. Snagla's special rules were as follows: Creeping Assault, Fast Cavalry, Fear Elves, Forest Strider, Obstacle Strider, Hatred for the Empire, Poisoned Attacks, and Wallcrawler. Wallcrawler is the apotheosis of details that I am curious to see if CA will try to implement. In tabletop, this meant models with this rule treat ungarrisoned buildings as open terrain for the purposes of movement. They may not finish their movement inside or on top of an ungarrisoned building. They cannot linger. If implemented as true to that as possible, in Total War siege battles, all spider units would be able to climb walls as if they were using ladders. Is this even a possibility for CA to create? I have no idea, but I do know it would take the Forest Goblin faction from interesting to absolutely game-changing. I mean, swarms of hatchlings is one thing, but can you imagine just bypassing a wall with your Arachnarok spider? Insane. Again, questionable whether we will ever get to see this, but if we did, I don't care what price they put on that DLC, I'm buying. Stats-wise, his missile should be similar to Marcus Wolfheart and Oxyodal, albeit with half as much ammunition. On his generic giant spider mount, he would be just a bit improved over the Goblin Big Boss in melee, but would receive a significant increase in health, armor, and weapon strength on his unique gigantic spider. Attributes such as Vanguard deployment, fire whilst moving, strider, and stalk may be in the cards, as well as a passive ability representing the undulating war cry that increases charge bonus or mass for nearby spider cavalry, as well as causing terror. Now, perhaps all Forest Goblin big bosses and war bosses get some kind of bound ability that is a war cry for the same purposes, and maybe Snagla just gets the upgraded version of that. Now that about covers Snagla, but there are other characters that fall in the umbrella of forest goblins, chief among them being Tinnit Four Eyes. The goblin shaman Tinnit Four Eyes rode atop the beast he called the Black Bigness, the magic of his sacred spider shrine forcing the branches of nearby trees to twist in revulsion at his passing. The ivory scalp of the Black Bigness was a much feared sight in the Drakwold, for it heralded not only an imminent Arachnarok attack, but also the deadly shamanic energies that crackled out from Tinnit's wizened hands. While I have no doubt CA will choose Snagla for a legendary lord, I would still love to see Tinnit Four Eyes possibly as a pseudo-legendary lord or hero, a legendary character wielding the lore of spiders on a named Arachnarok. Sign me up. Grokka Goreaxe is a savage orc from the Drakwold, who in the end times united all the tribes of the forest against the invading forces of GROBSPIT. He went on a massive rampage against the forces of chaos, but was ultimately beheaded by Eogric the Vile, one of Gotrot's lieutenants. Before his headless body collapsed, he killed 2 more Norskins. Call it kinetic energy. Grokka could stand with his own faction in perhaps one of the jungles of the world with a focus on fighting chaos. I think if he were to be implemented, it would be more likely to be as a pseudo or hero for either Snagla or Wurzag. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay introduced several forest goblin characters from the Cluster Eye tribe. It is led by Warlord Griddle Eightlegs, who seemingly does not leave the shadow of the Black Pit. He has tasked his best general Vish Venombarb with managing the forest patrols. Vish is a seasoned campaigner, whose face is a twisted mass of scars and fungal infections. He takes his orders seriously, remaining several miles to the south of any elf settlements or thoroughfares. He is tasked with providing a tribute of slaves to satisfy the demands of the Black Pit Night Goblins. Usually, he can make his quota by ambushing small bands of Ungor, but if the beastmen cannot be found, he leads his warband to one of the many human villages within striking range, and tries to capture as many of them as he can before they muster a defense. Vish rides a Drakwold man-catcher with markings in dun and dark gray that make it very hard to spot amongst the treetops. Vish is an expert in milking the spider for venom that he daubs upon his arrowheads. Vish wears a suit of armor constructed from bits of spider chitin. Though Vish is more of a lord than Snagla is, I'm not sure CA will consider him or his 3 legendary hero-level characters for Total War. Perhaps Vish could be a pseudo in some other part of the world. Where Snagla would use anti-large ranged, Vish would focus anti-infantry melee, though both would be capable hybrid combatants, especially mounted. Perhaps the best way to use Vish and his associates is as inspiration for elite infantry units, especially the idea of spider chitin armor. Piggybacking off of that, let's talk about some units that are inspired by Vish and his associates. At Tier 3, I've added some unit ideas in yellow that should not be considered official. I did base them off what I read of Vish Venombarb and his army from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. While not necessary, it is always nice to have some more elite infantry options over the standard fair chaff. Venombarb guards would take after their namesake in wearing spider chitin armor, and giant spiders in Total War have 70 armor. They wield a katana-esque greatsword for armor piercing and anti-infantry. Beyond that, they are a hybrid bow unit, making them extremely versatile and incredibly elite for a goblin unit. I compare them with Storm Vermin, Lothern Sea Guard, amongst others. Black-hearted warriors could be extremely similar to Sneaky Gets, but with an anti-large focus similar to Eshin Triads. They would throw javelins as their precursor weapon, and then fight on with their spears. Bugshot skirmishers could be a stalking missile infantry most similar to huntsmen and night goblin archers. Huntsmen were bred hunting the monsters of the Drakewald. It makes sense that the forest goblins there might develop similar hunters for similar prey. Now, those are just some ideas for some elite infantry, but otherwise what we can add from official sources for forest goblins, at Tier 0, meaning they can be recruited from any settlement where the forest goblin building chain can be constructed, meaning you don't need the building itself to recruit. First we have forest goblins, sword and shield. We also have the spear and shield in Tier 1, but they could easily switch places. Sword version is better at melee, generally, but spear has anti-large and charge defense. The main difference between forest goblins and regular goblins is poison damage and the woodsman trait, making them unimpeded by trees. They would also have less or no armor, but possibly physical resistance like savage orcs. Spider hatchlings are also a no-brainer in Tier 0, as they are just a very weak but nice to have a harassing unit with their poison and speed, a nice fast tar pit type unit. For Tier 1, we should get the giant spiders unit from Drycha's Wild Beasts. This is just a war beasts unit instead of a swarm type like the hatchlings. A Forest Goblin Archer unit is the same difference between the Goblin and Forest Goblin melee units, Poison/Woodsman Archers. At Tier 2, we could have a Javelin variant, because Forest Goblins are known to use them. The shorter range, higher damage, and anti-large could add nice variety. Next, the Spider Rider variant should also be moved exclusively to this building, so that, like the Savage Orcs, you have to have the right settlement to recruit from this subrace, since they are the rarest greenskin subrace only found in the deepest, darkest forests of the world. I do think the current Spider Riders need a rework. Can you tell me what's wrong with this picture? They are the same size as Drycha's spiders, being the giant, not gigantic variant. I know that's confusing, but the mounted version should not be substantially inferior to the feral version. All stats should be brought up to match the feral version, with the melee mounted going slightly over, and the ranged version slightly under, additionally causing fear in woodsmen. Maybe only Snagla's faction can recruit the Forest Goblin hero variants, the first being the Big Boss. Instead of having him be another melee variant, like the regular goblin, I think the hero should be a ranged variant with either a bow, javelin, or choice between the two in the skill tree. Perhaps only for the Forest Goblin faction, you can also recruit a Forest Goblin war boss, who I think could also be a ranged variant like the hero, to give us a sharpshooting skirmisher lord. Both might innately start on a giant spider mount, and then eventually unlock a gigantic man-catcher spider mount. Gigantic spiders are monstrous cavalry-sized, as opposed to the war beast regular cavalry-sized of the giant spiders currently in the game. They could have one feral, one missile, and one mounted melee variant, but I imagine one with bows and one with javelins. The bow version would focus more on skirmishing, while the javelin charges in. Plague drones are the only monstrous missile cavalry currently in the game, but I think comparing with giant spider riders to stag knights and the Sisters of the Thorn is the best way to get an estimate of stats. Combined with the Wallcrawler rule, these creepy crawlies would be a nightmare on any battlefield. Web flingers are like rock lobbers that inflict poison damage and may even briefly slow or immobilize whatever targets they hit. They wouldn't have any armor piercing, most likely, but would be good for slowing and weakening enemies. An idea I had was that maybe wherever the web hits, spider hatchlings are summoned briefly, but that would be maybe overpowered and hard to implement. Perhaps for a regiment of renown, though. There were no rules for a ground crew, because in tabletop, web flinger were an upgrade for the Arachnarok spider's howdah, much like the catch web spider shrine. I think if they can manage to operate one on a monster's back, they can also operate a four-flinger ground crew. Lastly, a Forest Goblin Shaman hero recruited at Tier 3 with the lore of spiders would be great for Snagla's faction, Additionally, a Forest Goblin Great Shaman generic lord is an absolute no-brainer. Now, I've already talked about starting positions in this series, but there is yet more. Firstly, when Forest Goblins eventually become more fleshed out, there are 4 places they should live as a faction with or without the player. Foremost is the Black Pit in the Empire, the northernmost location circled on the map. The central creeping death tribe in the Forests of Gloom, and the southern Leafcutters tribe should also get the Forest Goblin makeover. To the east, we have at least one mention of Forest Goblins in Goreaxe. This eastern location could add a bit of flavor. I don't know of Forest Goblins living in Lustria, but this climate does seem suitable. In my last video, I discussed all the different locations I think the final 3 Greenskin lords could end up in, but today I just want to say how I would land them. Grimgor, Grom, Azhag, and Skarsnik all stay put. Wurzag moves down to the Southlands jungles. Gorfang starts in Black Crag. Then Gorbad and Snagla get dual starting positions. I think Gorbad getting this dual start is more important to explain why he hasn't been seen or heard of in the old world, whilst also maintaining his rightful fortress Iron Rock, where he can stage a campaign against his foes he is famous for battling, such as other Greenskins, dwarves, and most importantly, the Empire. Starting in a desert location of Ind near the shore would be ideal for giving the player choice. Do I write a new story with Gorbad and tear down the human empires of Ind and Cathay? Or do I sail over to the World's Edge Mountains to consolidate at Iron Rock? Or something else entirely? Another idea I had stemming from wanting Morglum the Neck Snapper as a Confederation mission pseudo-legendary lord, mouthful, for Gorfang is, what if Morglum could also be used as the lord at Iron Rock for Gorbad's dual start? This could be a new way to introduce pseudo-legendary lords for more game variety in multiple campaigns. Similarly, a pseudo-legendary lord is why I think Snagla would be great for a dual start. We know he wanders as far as Carrick Eat Peaks to fight with Skarsnik. Black Pit is no doubt the home base, but a solo start for Snagla here might put too much pressure on the already struggling Empire factions. Any of the other Forest Goblin locations would fit for the dual start, but Goreaxe is my favorite. You could start fighting Chaos near the southern tip, Snake Men near the center, or perhaps the malevolent tree spirits in the jungles of Qian. With sea lanes, there is also the possibility of consolidating your power to the Black Pit in a little over a dozen turns. Variety aside, the main reason I want Snagla away from home is so we can have Tinnit Four Eyes as a pseudo-legendary lord, holding down the Black Pit, riding the Black Bigness Arachnarok Spider. I would be beyond happy with a dual start Snagla with Tinnit. CA, if you're listening, that shit right there is gold. Make it happen. Please. And with these pseudo-legendary lords, it's a similar idea as legendary heroes. It gives us another unique character without all the work of a starting faction. Give them a reskin, tweaked stats, and a few unique skills, and voila. And that should about cover everything. I say, Forest Goblins are the biggest missing piece of the Greenskin puzzle. Though he may not be the only character, Snagla is clearly the top candidate here. For those of you that have been waiting for this video, I thank you for your patience. Business had been taking most of my free time in the last few weeks. I also knew this was the most important video of this series, and it deserved not to be rushed. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, commenting, and or subscribing to help support the continuation of this channel. Hitting the bell will also help you stay notified when I do finish a video. Thanks for being here, and I hope you visit again. Take care.